The Dwellers on the Nile. The Life, History, Religion, and Literature of the Ancient Egyptians by E. A. Wallis Budge continues chapter 10. The Egyptian Dead, Heaven and Hell, the Future Life. Another view was that the mummification and spells made to spring up from the natural body, another body which was identical with it in shape and form, but was so immaterial in character that it might be called a spirit body. This body was the Sa, and many passages in the pyramid texts prove that it lived in heaven with the entities, and that the soul dwelt in it. We read less about it in the text of the New Kingdom, and their general evidence suggests that the latter Egyptians preferred to believe in the resurrection of the man's natural body. Now, there's an inscription of the in the Great Pyramid that's several thousand years old, or several thousand years older than the pyramids believed to be. I think it's just several thousand years old, like 5,000 something BCE or something like that, that could be said to represent a soul doctrine of this part and split. I forget exactly the order, but when a man was born, there was born with him the K, a word very difficult to render by any one word. A word very difficult to render by any one word. It is usually translated by double, but at times it seems to mean character, disposition, individuality, mind, personality, etc. It was ever present with a man during life, and after death it dwelt in the tomb with his body. It needed food and drink, and delighted in the smell of the meat offerings and the perfume of flowers, or so people thought. And in all periods men prayed to Yusur and the entities of his company to give an abundant supply of offerings for the benefit of their Kayu. The Ka had its chapel, Hut Tupper K. There existed a body of priests called Ministers of the Ka, Hmu K. In many a tomb of the Old Kingdom, it is found a painted stone portrait of a figure of the deceased, seated or standing in a specially prepared, walled-off chamber, with an opening in one of the walls. Or is it Hnu K? Because this thing's Maybe that is Hnu. With an opening in one of the walls, through which it might be seen that the offerings and enjoy the smell of them. But this has been called the Ka statue, but there is a possibility that it had nothing to do with the Ka, and that it was only regarded as a memorial statue. Her presenting Yemenhotep when a babe and his K to the entity Yemen Ra, who acknowledges the child to be his son and blesses him. So Ra is said to be the Lord in the cartouche, and I can't think of anything else to add to that, but I got that there. The Ka statue. Oh yeah, the Ka statue might have nothing to do with the Ka. Okay. Other nations have set up such statues and effigies of the dead over their tombs, but the Egyptians set their statues inside the tombs of their beloved ones. Pictures of offerings of food, drink, flowers, etc. were often painted on the inside of coffins and on the walls of tombs, with a very definite object, these as a means of supplying decay with nourishment. Circumstances might arise when it would be impossible to continue to supply material offerings to the K. In such case, the K would be expected to recite a spell, I am master of my heart, and my breast, and my hands, and my feet, and my mouth, and all my members, and my funerary offerings. Book of the Dead, chapter 68. The words here rendered funerary offerings. Crew are persmanib persmanu okay, there's two characters I can't read at the moment, and their literal meaning is offerings of bread, meat, geese, incense, wine that appear at the word. And when these words were pronounced either by the Ka or his kinsfolk, offerings straightway appeared. We have seen above that the heart of the deceased was weighed in the great scales, and that his soul stood by and testified on its behalf. The soul, Bay, is often depicted in the form of a man-headed hawk. Bay. When a man died, it left him and it went to heaven, where it lived with the entities and with the souls of the righteous, but it was believed to descend from time to time to visit the body in which it formerly dwelt, and a passage was always prepared through which it might enter the mummy chamber, and the soul of the scribe Nebsni, yes, Nebsni. The conception concerning the bay associated with it, the heart, and for this reason it has been called the heart soul to distinguish from the yaksu, or spirit, or spirit soul, the exact functions of which are not known, and linguistically this is tied to the light beings, the unseen beings we got. The light beings, the fire beings, and the clay beings. But the clay beings are those beings that will inhabit material bodies. Well, I mean, actually incarnate, or were incarnated, or, that sort of thing. The name Run, the name, and shadow. Yakabit also formed an important elements of a man, and each accompanied him after his resurrection into heaven. According to one view, the souls of the blessed dwelt with the entities in a heaven situated above the sky. The floor of the heaven formed the sky, which was rectangular in shape and was supported by 4 pillars, sort of like the upside down spindle symbols. The 4 pillars of Shu, one at each corner. Each pillar was kept in its place by one of the 4 sons of Her, whose names were Amset, Hapi, Dwamatef, and Kapusnef. Other views represented the sky in the form of a woman with a bowed body whose hands and feet touched the earth, and in the form of a cow the 4 legs of which formed the 4 pillars of the sky. The souls that wished to ascend to the floor of heaven were obliged to use the ladder. And in the papyrus of Anui, I think it's Anui, not Annie, this ladder is depicted. Yosir himself had recourse to a ladder, and Set and Horus stood by and held it firmly whilst the entity ascended it. An ancient tradition states that souls set out on their journey to heaven through the gap in the mountains at Abydos called Bagay. Near this gap was the famous well into which offerings to the dead were put. It was connected by means of a subterranean passage with the kingdom of Yisir, and offerings made by the faithful were transported through it to their kinsfolk in the other world. According to the Book of Gates, the judgment hall of Yisir was situated at Abydos, and the judgment of the dead took place here daily at midnight. The oldest name for the place of departed spirits is Dwa Atpur, or Swatpur. The meaning of which is unknown. Well, obviously, we're having some ascendant thing because we have the word for it. We have the star and we have the basic glyph for heaven by itself. Well, actually, that's not. Put, ta, anyways, per. But obviously, the dead are beyond this material thing. We think that some people think, oh, the dead are come visit us and all this, and it's more the memories and energies and stuff that have stayed, and perhaps beings that remember that. According to some text, it was situated under the earth and contained the kingdom of Yosir, a region where the entities of the dead lived, and a series of the underworlds of great towns and cities like Memphis, Heliopolis, Sais, Heracleopolis. To reach the kingdom of Yosir, the deceased had to cross a great river, the waters of which, when drunk by the righteous, were cool and sweet, but when drunk by the wicked, were boiling hot and bitter. Yosir kept a ferryman called Harfhaf. Oh, now we have the characters. Okay, so now we can say it right. Harfia. Tiaf. Okay, because I think that's a the little head thing. It's not a, but it's because there's the head that faces you. That's the her, and there's the teeth. Her fiat teeth, perhaps. Yes. The face turned behind him, and who therefore had eyes in the back of his head, so to speak. If this body and his magical boat were satisfied that the souls that came to him were to be carried across were right and true, he would transport them to the land of Yosir. If they were not, the ferryman and the boat refused to take them. The ferryman's head was turned behind him, so that he would be able to see any souls that tried to board his boat as he was pushing off, and could thrust them away. Once across the river, the soul had to pass through the 7 arats. Aratu, yeah. If we're going to have Egyptian words, let's give it the right. Instead of S, let's give it a U as its plural. But there's a ui as the double, and I forget how the rest of the numbers, but are large gates, each of which admitted to it a large hall, and was guarded by three entities: the gatekeeper, the announcer, and the watcher. The arrival of every soul was announced to Yasur, and without his permission, no soul was admitted. It is uncertain whether these halls were all on the same level, or whether they were placed one above the other. Some papyri mention 21 gates, in which case each hall would have 3 gates, and some give the number as 10 or 12. 21 is a particular number that's sacred to the Yazidi. It's also the number of the letters in the Enochian alphabet. The whole question is difficult, and the Egyptians themselves were as much puzzled by it as we are. In every case, each gate was guarded by 3 entities of terrifying forms and aspects. Besides these gates and halls, there were 12 circuits. And, you definitely have to, when you got the Q versus the K, you definitely have to say it differently. You don't want to say the wrong word, or at least I don't. 4 of which are described in a papyrus in the British Museum, number 10,478, but where and how they were situated cannot be said. Dante probably derived his idea of the circles from Egyptian tradition, or various other religions, but perhaps indirectly, probably, because the Greeks and the Romans and different views about the situation of the kingdom of Yasur also existed. According to the Menes on the sarcophagi of the Middle Kingdom, Yasur dwelt on an island surrounded by several islets, but the papyri in the New Kingdom show that the beautiful lived in a place intersected by canals, and that they plowed and harrowed the ground between them, and sowed grain, and reaped their harvests, and threshed wheat and barley there. The wheat was 8 feet high, the ears were 3 feet long, and the stalks 5 feet. And I'm getting rumbly at the tumbly at the mention of all this food, right? The barley was about 12 feet high. The ears were 5 feet long, and the stalks 7 feet long. The spirits who reaped the crops were 15 feet high. Several boats, which were self-propelled, were moored to steps, and in these the beatified sailed about at will. The books of the gate show that the Duat was a circular valley formed by the body of Yasur himself, and that it was on the plain of the land of Egypt or of the sky. The sun entity traverses the valley each night and sails over the whole length of the river in it, in his boat, with his entities, and as he advances, he gives light and air to the dead, who are in the various sections of the Duat. The righteous are on the right bank of the river, and the sinners on the left. As he passes along, he rewards the righteous with celestial food and drink, and the wicked are punished and condemned by him to utter destruction. In the 5th division of the Duat, we find the souls of foreigners, the Libyans, the Asiatics, and the Negroes. The Egyptians and the rest of the Semites, you can call them Semites, not because they're somehow Jews or something. I'm talking about as a transition race. But they were definitely dark-skinned, blacker than what we'd call them, blacker than the non-immigrant black population in America. So, but the Egyptians, as I'm saying, they weren't as dark as like the Libyans or the Nubians or something. Each nation being separate from the Egyptians. In the 6th division is the Judgment Hall of Yasur. The entity sits on a chair of state placed on a throne with 9 steps, and at midnight he judges all the souls who have come there during the day. To the righteous he awards estates in Seket Yaru, and the wicked he hands over to his headman Sheshmu, who hacks their bodies into pieces which fall down into a pit of fire where they are consumed. And the Seket Yaru are fields of reeds where the blessed dead live. This is how they... 3 symbols of power at the top there. Row 1, the deceased adoring the entities, paddling a boat, and sensing a divine soul in the Seket Hetep. The deceased sowing, reaping, threshing the grain, and adoring the Nile entity in the second one. The magic boats of Ra, Wanuther, which move by themselves, and the boat of the entities and perfect souls who reap the celestial crops. And oh, yeah, hold on a sec. I'm trying to see if there's anything else I want to say in passing, but I guess I'll leave that. The righteous have the choice of 2 heavens in which to live, viz. the Seket Yaru of Yisur and the boat of the sun entity Ra. And remember the parable in Surah 18 of the Quran about the 2 gardens? I think that's where it is, Surah 18. The followers of Yisur, the greater number of the Egyptians, preferred his Elysian fields. The Greek name for it. But I forget what the name looks like, but I think could be the powerful something. The followers of Yisur, the greater number of Egyptians, preferred his Elysian fields, where they could enjoy spiritualized pleasures and an existence that closely resembled their life on earth. Those who chose the boat of Ra sailed with him over the skies. They fed upon light and were arrayed in light, and were finally absorbed into the light of the entity himself. On the other hand, the Osirians assisted Yisur in cultivating the plant of truth, Ma'at. And what's that phrase that there's like a square and a compass symbol somewhere, and this has written on it, so that's one of the terms in that saying, which was of the substance of Yisur himself. And as they lived upon Ma'at, they finally became absorbed into Yisur and lived by and in him forever. The boat of Ra passed on, and the ministers of the entity gathered together his enemies in a place at the eastern end or side of the Duat, where they were to be destroyed and the fire pits prepared for them. When Ra arrived, he passed the sentence of death on them, and they were thrust head downwards into pits full of red-hot sand forthwith. The pits were fed with a constant supply of fire, which the entities of destruction vomited continually into them, and the bodies, souls, and shadows of the enemies of Ra were utterly consumed in the sight of those beatified souls that had chosen his boat as their heaven. Some have adduced that the nays of the Book of Gates as proofs that the Egyptians believed in purgatory, thinking that the bodies and souls and shadows in the fire pits represented those of the human beings. But this is not the case, for the enemies of Ra were the devils and fiends of mist, clouds, darkness, and rain that tried to prevent the sun from rising in the dead, and the fate of these, as also of the enemies of Yusur, was annihilation. So, trying to find exact parallels, particularly when you only look at the stories and not the meanings of the names and the symbols attached, is much harder. But let's remember that the personifications and all that say more about us than the vine. Okay, Diorite Ushapti figure made for Amenhotep II, king of Egypt, about 1450 BCE. Now in the British Museum, the Ushapti figure was supposed to do agricultural work for the deceased in the other world, number 35,365. There, and this fatter one, the cover of the outer coffin of Hent Mahet, a priestess of Yemen Ra, about 1000 BCE, now in the British Museum, 51,101. So, that one. Well, I don't know where I put my finger, but, I was, the annihilation of the damned in the Duat, the underworld. The shadows, the Kabi, the Kabi'u, okay, and the souls, Ba'u, of the wicked burnt in pits of fire, is the first number, the wicked head downwards being burnt in a pit of fire. It's to the right of that. The enemies, what's the word for enemies? I don't remember if there's a pronunciation for that symbol or not. Of Yusur being burnt in a pit of fire, I don't think it does. I think it's a determinative without any sound to it. Yusur seated under a canopy formed by the Mahan serpent, which spits fire onto the decapitated bodies of the damned and consumes them, and that's in the Book of the Gates. And we have, oh, those are Ankhs. I thought that was going to be a K, but let's look at that. Show you what I'm talking about. Under the Old Kingdom, heaven was reserved for kings alone, and the text on the pyramids of the 5th and 6th dynasties show us how kings were received by the entities and what they did in heaven. When Unas arrived in the other world, heaven dropped water floods and stars quaked, and the bow breakers ran about in terror. The bones of the entity Aker trembled. I don't know how to say that, but Aker. And all the beings there fled when they saw him rising up as a soul and as an entity who lived upon his fathers and mothers. Unas hunted the entities. Herthurtu lassoed them. Kensu cut their throats and took out their intestines. Shemsu cut them up and cooked them in his fiery cauldrons. Unas ate them, and so absorbed their spirits and vital powers. The largest and finest of the entities he ate at daybreak. The smaller ones he ate for his evening meal, and the smallest he ate during the night. The old and worn-out entities he rejected entirely and used their bodies as fuel for his furnace. The cauldrons containing the thighs of the entities, of the demons and demonesses, were heated by entities who rejected fire from their bodies into the cauldrons beneath them. In his hunting expeditions, Unas journeyed over every part of the day sky and the night sky. The strength he derived from eating the entities enabled him to become the chief of the oldest entities of heaven and the equal of the giant of Orion. His power and will were supposed to be absolute, for the spirits and souls of the entities were in him, and he had absorbed the wisdom of them all, and the property of everlasting life, which especially belonged to them. Think of the psychological parts and stuff like this that's being personified in this story. It doesn't mean there's not entities, but what is this doing to us? I mean, how are we working through these themes? Thus he possessed the power to live longer than any entity and to live as long as the heavens endured. Yeah, you go beyond the body and, oh, here's the quality, here's the quality, here's the quality. If the description of the life led by Unas in heaven is to be believed, we must conclude that when upon earth he lived the life of a savage African cannibal, whose chief delights and occupations were fighting and the carrying off of men's wives. Perhaps this is his hellfire, not his